this is Sustainics. It's been a while since I've spoken in this podcast, Sustainics. I think the first two episodes were quite disjointed. The first one was about the mending spirit. And I think when I started this podcast, I really wanted to start somewhere which was obvious about sustainability. That's why I spoke about rekindling the mending mindset and turning ourselves into someone more oriented towards repairing things rather than throwing them away, and reprocuring and purchasing, being in the consumption mode. I was supposed to plan for a second part, and I'll come back to that in due course, right? About the mending spirit when it comes down to relationships in particular, and even to ideas. How can we repair ideas or ideologies that have been damaged in the past, right? So that was episode 1 of Sustainics. And then in episode 2, I think I took advantage of a trip to my hometown, Gap, to speak about food for the first time, right? And I was on this lovely Saturday market in Gap with such beautiful organic food, local, coming from local farmers. And I spoke about the benefits of local markets and the diversity of food and nutrients you can get on such markets, right? And I think that's quite core. The theme and the subject of food is quite core to Sustainics, because at the end of the day, Sustainics is about discussing the way of life and the habits and the behaviors we must embrace to promote and to generalize sustainable ways of living. And I've put Sustainics X in the end because I think there's techniques. There's a dimension of methodology and techniques to become sustainable. There's a toolkit, I believe. And also it alludes to systemics, which is a field of science which I really like. Systemics. From very early on in my life and in my intellectual growth, I've been interested in that. Reading books from French authors like Joël Doronnet. The Macroscope is a really good book about systemics. And then, of course, further down, Edgar Morin and his trilogy called The Method, right? Which is, to me, systemics to the core, right? How everything is about systems, right? And about the fact that indeed there is an interdependency between members of the system. There is also in systemics this possibility of emergence of complexity, of increasing complexity, right? And in another podcast, in another room of the Camel Hall, we will be talking, for instance, about the emergence of AI, right? And this era of augmented intelligence we're going through. For me, that's part of systemics, right? Increasing the complexity of our world and our society and of who we are, right? But back to the topic, I don't want to digress too much. Today, I want to introduce again the general field of food and nutrition, right, as part of our effort to encourage sustainability in all compartments of our life, individual and collective. I'm just going to, hey, there you go. I'm just going to make sure that I've got enough light on this screen so I can see myself. I want to talk in the next few weeks a lot about nutrition and food because it's essential to what we are, who we are, how we behave. In the switch, I spent an entire episode talking about the meds, about how we can work on our own performance and general health by taking our meds, which included meditation, exercise, diet, and sleep, right? But diet, right, is what I want to come back to today in Sustainics, right? What we ingest, what we feed to our body, and it's essentially through our mouth, right? Nutrients, food, of course, drinks, water, generally speaking, but not only. And to an extent, the air we're breathing, right? Anything that really comes through the system of our body, right? We are an open system, right? We've got several openings, so to speak. Some of them are meant for ingestion, and some others are meant for elimination. Right? I'm not going to give you a full picture of the human body, but essentially, right, if we come down to the nitty-gritties of what natural living and organic living is, It's about making sure that we take good care of our intake functions, right? Things how we can absorb, breathe, drink, feed, and how we eliminate, right? And of course, let me be trivial for a minute, right? Urinate, eliminate excrements, the sudation, right? And of course, the exhaling, right? And we inspire, we inhale, and we exhale. And in this process, of course, we convert oxygen into carbon dioxide, right? So intake functions, elimination functions, right? So this is going to be essential about talking about our health and talking about the viability and the good harmony of our society. Okay. So the topics I'm going to introduce today is a bit double. It's a two-step sort of way of thinking, which is about food. And it's going to have consequences, and we are going to cover a lot of ground as a result, and we'll talk about a variety of questions that we are going to clear out. Not once for all, but at least we're going to define the lay of the land as far as nutrition is concerned, right? So first we're going to talk about the way we're eating today in our modern society, right? And there's heaps of documentaries and books at the moment, in particular on Netflix, but not only on Prime, on Apple TV, everywhere, on YouTube. You will find a lot of topics about the incredible damage caused by the so-called Western diet, which essentially is the American diet, let's be honest, right? Which essentially is diet based on processed food, industrial food, fast food, okay? I'm going to be very quick today, but we'll come back to that. But it's about this diet that is causing, the biggest pandemic ever seen in the world, right? Diabetes, heart diseases, cancer, right? Which are major prime causes of disease and death in the Western world, right? Including now, unfortunately, even in Western Europe, even in France, the country, and in the Mediterranean, right? The area where the so-called Mediterranean diet or Cretan diet has helped people live for so long, for so many centuries, right? And we'll come back to that, to what's the Cretan diet and the Mediterranean diet, etc. So we'll need to examine the way we're eating today, which is really mind-blowingly bad, right? We're disconnected from food and from our environment, right? We're eating food that has nothing to do anymore with the natural elements it's coming from, right? It's debilitating. Biscuits, dairy, even processed meat, canned food of all sorts, not to mention now the highly sophisticated, pre-cooked, meals that are available in supermarkets. It's just mind-blowing, really. So we'll talk about that, and we'll make a first step in the direction of conscious eating, right? And conscious eating is, it's really this vital need. We have to become conscious of what we are putting in our mouth, right? And take a moment and look at our refrigerator, at our pantry, at our plate, and say, what is it that I'm eating, right? I need to be aware of that. And in being aware also, I need, in the process of putting that in my mouth, I need to be mindful. And as I ingest it, take the time to understand what it's doing to me, right? How does it taste? Does it satisfy my hunger? Is it something that is soothing or exacerbating my cravings, right? We will have these sort of questions, right? So that will be a first step to talk about conscious eating, taking the time. I'm going to move that a little bit because, of course, the sun keeps moving around me, huh? And I'm in the sun as I speak, so I can move back. Taking the time to analyze the snapshot. Tie break. Let's have a look. What am I eating? Be conscious about what's available in the environment and all that, right? So the second step we're going to take is going to be intentional eating, right? And we're going to talk about, now that I know how the world is organized in terms of food, what's happening, all this fast food, junk food, industrial food, and how I'm eating today, I'm going to set an intention about the kind of food that I want to put in my belly, right? I'm not presuming of the outcome of that, right? So don't get me wrong, this is not going to be necessarily the apology of a particular diet, right? And we'll talk, of course, at length about a number of fads or a number of trends, right, in terms of diet. So of course we'll talk about all these diets we've seen in the past, in the recent period of time, about low fat, then low carb, right, then keto, then paleo, and now I don't know what's the latest, right? But these diets which presumably are helping people, feel better. One of the top concerns that most people would have is making sure that they can lose weight, because of course, as a result of our Western food, we have ended up being overweight. Most of us, right? There is a pandemic of obesity not looming there in the world. And that's a precursor, of course, of all these conditions we've been talking about, which are diabetes, heart disease, cancer. Okay? So we'll cover that. And then, of course, we'll come at some point to talk about besides the dieting to lose weight and all that, we'll start asking ourselves the question, what's the food I want to eat to be healthy? Just to be healthy. And maybe we'll project ourselves back in the past, right? And think about our grandparents and even before and say, how did our ancestors eat, right? And I'm not saying that they were living longer and healthier, right? There were a lot of challenges probably in a lot of cultures in the past. Not necessarily linked to food, but definitely linked to medicine, hygiene, and access to a number of commodities, right? But food-wise, maybe there will be some lessons to draw from past experience, okay, and from our ancestors. But we are going to talk, of course, about vegetarianism, pescatorism. Right? Some people are pescatarian, some people are vegetarian, some people are vegan, right? Or some people are carnivores or omnivores, right? So what does that mean? What does that entail for our health, okay? And in doing so, of course, and we'll try not to have any radical point of view whatsoever, right? So I'm not going to advocate here for veganism, for instance, or for the carnivorous diet at the other end. But we are going to think in terms of health, and also intent. What's behind the food I'm having? What is it doing to me, but also what is it doing to the environment, right, and to other people? Because don't forget, we're a system. So of course, first we are concerned by this beautiful system here, and we want it to be healthy, right, and have pleasure to an extent, and not to be fat and to be able to exercise, etc., etc. But the next step is really to think: is it sustainable with the planet? And we'll need to talk about agriculture, right, or at least food production. How does that work? How is this food I'm eating being produced? And what's the impact on the environment, but also from a social perspective, right? On workers, on farmers. Is the life of farmers great or not so great? Is it challenging? So there will be a dimension of social justice and all that. We'll introduce, of course, some important concepts in terms of health regarding we'll talk about naturopathy, for instance, and naturopathic practices. And this is not at all to dismiss traditional medicine, right, which is now the normal medicine. So let me try to position things here, right? There is the classic or standard medicine nowadays that we take, which is the modern one, based on science and based on the fact that if you have disease, you have symptoms, and the modern medicine is going to address the symptoms. Through the symptoms, your GP is going to make a diagnosis, right, and try to understand what can be the cause of your disease, and at the end of the day, treat that by some exogen intervention. Would that be medicines, pills, right, potions, or would that be surgery? Okay, or other forms of radiations, for instance, when it comes down to cancer, for instance, right? So that's what modern medicine is doing, okay? Then there's a second kind of medicine, which is called the which is still also modern, but which is softer, less intrusive, which is called homeopathic medicine, right? And this is very popular, in particular in Europe, with all the microdosing of particular substances or principles, and also to a degree in Asian medicine through all the herbalist remit, right? So it's more natural, it's herbal, and then of course you've got all this remit of acupuncture and all that, right? Which again, soft medicines, right? Or we call them medicine douce in in Switzerland or in France. But yeah, that would be how we call them, like milder or soft medicine. And then there's a third type of medicine, which seems to be recent, naturopathy, but it's not. It's just traditional medicine. It's just old school medicine, right? So it's a bit of a blur between, the modern Asian herbalist, but also all the traditional principles of being healthy. And naturopathy will be really more about preventing diseases through healthy habits, and in particular, healthy diet. And of course, the rest of it, sleep, exercise. Remember, the meds, meditation, exercise, diet, and sleep. Okay? So that's what naturopathy is all about, and naturopathic practices are going to look after what you ingest, right? So in making sure that you've got good ingestion functions, but also you've got good elimination function, right? And that what you gets in gets out. Except the little goodness that needs to stay in your body, of course, to feed your brain and to grow your muscles and your bones, and just keep replacing the junk in your body, so dead cells, by healthy cells. Okay? So, of course, we will have a strong naturopathic angle in the sense that we are going to treat food as medicine. And it's not a medicine that heals, really, right? That would be, we're not going to go into this charlatan kind of angle saying that if you eat that, that's going to heal you. Yeah, okay, you can always eat oranges when you when you have a cold, because presumably the C vitamin included in it is going to help you, right, recover. But really, food as medicine is preventing diseases and preventing imbalances in your body and helping the natural functions of your body, in particular the elimination ones, transit, your renal kidney processing, the kidney functions, liver functions, your guts, of course, the good health of your biome, and generally speaking, also to an extent, your level of hydration, your sudation. So exercise is going to help you eliminate a lot of toxins through sudation, and the breathing, which is essential also to make sure deep breathing in particular, and breathing techniques to eliminate the carbon dioxide that always lingers at the bottom of your lungs. Okay, so of course, as we step into conscious food and conscious eating, and then intentional food and intentional eating, we will have this spotlight and light shed by naturopathic practices, right? What is the right thing to make part of your feeding habits from a naturopathic perspective to prevent diseases and to keep the homeostatic state of your body? Okay? Disclaimer, we of course will speak about that. And then, of course, eventually we'll go further, right? We'll go beyond ourselves and talk about sustainability, food sustainability from an environmental and agricultural perspective. And we will have to address the elephant in the room, right? And the fact that nowadays, if really we put a big brush stroke on the American diet, which unfortunately for most of us is becoming the Western diet in Europe as well, we are in a corn and soy based food system. Primarily, wheat, cereals, corn and soy. But it's not corn and soy you're going to eat necessarily. 70% of it is going to be used to feed the cattle and the animal husbandry industry that is going to produce in turn animal proteins, right? Which are meat, obviously, but and now fish, because fish farms have been, are now mainstream, and there's a lot of fish farms everywhere, including in Norwegian fjords, right, or in Canadians, estuaries, which is quite distressing, really, when you think about it. And yeah, so there's this kind of protein, and then there's all the derived products, so the dairy in particular, right? Would that be primarily from cows, cow milk, but also goat milk, sheep milk, and the rest of it, okay? And all the dairy products, cheese, yogurt, creams of all sorts. So we live in a system where we need this massive amounts of crops, corn primarily, soy, wheat, right, to feed the cattle. So vegetal proteins turned into animal proteins that we are going to ingest in turn. And that would be through a mind-blowing indirect ways that you have no idea, right? When you we will go through the exercise of doing a bit of a supermarket shopping and look at all the products we can get there, and you will realize that 80% of your supermarket aisles and selling surface is dedicated to processed food coming from this product, either corn, soy, wheat, and at the end of the day, animal proteins, which is mind-blowing. And we know today, right, that one of the big causes of the modern conditions we have, which include diabetes, heart disease, cancer, come from the fact that we have a diet which causes extreme inflammation in our body and excessive levels of sugar in our body, in particular, right? Sugar is definitely, we'll talk about sugar and what sort of friend and foe it is for our body. So we'll definitely address this big topic, and also we'll talk about the level of inflammation that animal proteins are causing in us, and the fact that we could easily deal with other sources of proteins with much less levels of inflammation. Okay. So, and in doing that, of course, we are going to question the way farming is organized nowadays, right? So why are we pushing our farmers to all these massive monocultures of corn and soy, and on the one hand, and then cattle and pork and poultry on the other hand, right? With all the incredibly adverse consequences this has on the environment in terms of greenhouse gases emitted. We'll find the numbers, right? But I believe it's between 30 and 40% of the greenhouse gases emitted are coming from agriculture, right? Through animal husbandry, in particular, right? The methane of cows and of pork is well known because it's used also as a, believe it or not, as a combustible nowadays, right? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about also the impact in terms of deforestation. The fact that, in Brazil, in America, in Africa, in Asia, all these soils have been, all the forests are cut down to give way to pastures, grazing areas. And that's detrimental to our forests and biodiversity. That's detrimental to the wildlife, right? That used to roam in these environments. So huge impact. You can see the connection, right, between our diet, what we put in our mouth, right, and the entire production chain that needs to produce everything that we have currently in our diet, all this processed food, all this meat, all this dairy, and the consequences it has on the environment in terms, as I said, right, of greenhouse gases, in terms of deforestation, and in terms of soil. The soils are becoming poisoned and very poor because, of course, with monocultures, they're becoming devoid of nutrients. So, of course, we keep adding now chemical fertilizers, right, to keep harvesting crops, right? So we're using dead soil more and more with artificial chemical fertilizers to keep producing our crop. And what kind of crop, right? With all these chemical fertilizers, with all these pesticides, we'll talk also about the level of toxins that we are mindlessly consenting to put in our body, right? And of course, addressing this elephant in the room, we will come to speak about, what's the alternative, right? And where are we coming from as humans, right? As humanoids, since thousands, hundreds of thousands and millions of years, what has been our diet so far, right? And we are going to burst a few bubbles and take down a few myths about our diet and what we should ingest and what our ancestors have been eating. And we'll discover, no surprise, that over the eons, the thousands and thousands of years, we've primarily been feeding on plants, right? A primarily plant-based diet is probably something that our ancestors used to enjoy for centuries, and that's what we've forgotten, and that's what we are rediscovering today, right? So we'll talk about that, right? How can we transition from this debilitating diet that most of us have today to a more natural, primarily whole grain plant-based diet through intentional eating? Okay, so that's the pitch, right? We are in Sustainics, and this is an introduction to the topic of intentional eating. Selecting the food and the air and the beverage we are feeding our body with, right? With a view not only to be healthy and to prevent diseases, and including long-term diseases, the ones that we've seen surging in particular in the recent past, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, just to cite a few, not to talk about some degenerative diseases, probably caused by excessive toxins in our organism. And how through intentional eating also we can transform society, right? And make sure that we move towards a more sustainable way to live and use resources on this planet. Okay, I hope it makes sense. There will be a blog article attached to this podcast, so make sure to give me a like and to register. I know it's just episode 3 of Sustainics, and that's not the room of the camel hole I've been the most busy with, right? I spent a lot of time on personal development with the Switch, on high performance in the workplace with Drive and Thrive, and on artificial intelligence and technology with the AIM, right? The Augmented Intelligence Monitor. But it's time I come back to Sustainics, because at the end of the day, as you individuals, as friends, parents, partners, colleagues, we owe to live and lead by example, right? And spreading around the good word of how to live healthy and how to treat our planet with more respect. So it's an important room of the camel hole, and I will make sure in the next few weeks to be a little bit more present in this room and deliver some contents that we can keep debating about, right? I'm really keen to get comments and feedback and spark interactions. But for now, it's lunchtime, so I'm going to have an intentional think about what I'm going to eat for lunch, and I'll let you do the same. Until next time, thank you for watching Sustainics.